This risks being the most old man yelling at clouds video I've ever made, but I've seen some patterns in a lot of the people I talk to, as well as a lot of the video comments I receive in regards to how we watch movies. And yes, I do read every comment on every video. Now, your ears didn't deceive you. I said we, because the one thing I really want to impress early on here is that I hold no judgment, largely due to how guilty I am of this as well. I am not without sin. I throw no stones. But I also believe that if there is something you love, it is worthy of scrutiny, not out of castigation, but out of a desire to be better tomorrow than I was yesterday. So please join me as I examine this, and let's all strive to be better movie watchers for the next feature we press play on. So what do I mean when I say we're watching movies wrong? Believe it or not, it's more than just attention span. Even in the confines of the darkened movie theater where phones are put away for the duration, there is a more pressing issue at hand, and that is a combination of intention and presumption. So my first rule of thumb to be better movie watchers is meet the film where it stands. In my previous channel, I reviewed over 500 movies, and one of the first things I endeavored to do when I made that first video on The Devil's Doorway and established my scoring system is to have a category for intention. Adjustments to that system were necessary over time, but intention was one category I was unwilling to budge on, because it's so foundational. What is the filmmaker's intent with the film they are presenting to you, and then how successful they are at that? As important as this is, I admit that there have been many times where it's been difficult to establish that intention, and several times on reflection I realized I got it wrong, and it hurt my judgment of the film. Sid Field writes in his book that is Bible to many screenwriters, Screenplay, The Foundations of Screenwriting, your story determines the type of opening you choose. The opening of your screenplay has to be well thought out and visually designed to illustrate what your story is about. It's my estimation that a filmmaker has roughly 5 to 10 minutes to effectively communicate the intention of their film through their opening. So let's take a look at some effective examples of this. The Goonies opens with the title card displayed through the eye socket of a pirate's skull and crossbones. This immediately cuts to a jailbreak scene that simulates a man hanging himself in his cell, a daring getaway by a crime family, complete with peeling away in a gasoline-fueled wall of fire and maniacal laughter. The police chase commences with the music composed by Dave Grusin, showcasing adventure and whimsy, and while the opening credits are rolling during this chase, it passes by and establishes the personality of each of our Goonies characters. This chase scene wraps and the movie properly starts at the 5-minute and 4-second mark. Yet in that 5 minutes, we have established that this is a lighthearted family adventure starring a passel of children, which is comedic in nature, but also is not afraid to occasionally dip into some pretty dark tones and themes. Beyond the obvious, we also establish some things that largely go unspoken, but is still important. It is set in present day, relatively speaking, Earth. It is based in reality, or at least a family movie escapist type reality. By the accents, the position of the steering wheel of the car, etc., it's pretty easy to determine it's set in the USA. And further, by the scenery and the weather, it's also pretty easy to guess that it's likely set in the Pacific Northwest. All of this gets established to form our perception of what the rest of the movie will be delivering and inform us of the film's intention. The substance starts by showing what happens to an egg when introduced to the substance, effectively communicating the biological reality the film is presenting to us. We then see Elizabeth Sparkle's Walk of Fame star being created, then stood on at a premiere gala, then admired by tourists, then aged, cracked, and rained on, afterward effectively ignored by pedestrians, and then having a burger dropped on it with a big splatter of ketchup. We then cut to see Elizabeth Sparkle herself filming an exercise video until she exits the set and walks into her orange hallway surrounded by a career's worth of posters, seemingly all of workout videos. She goes to use the restroom only to find the women's room is out of order, and she must use the men's room. While she's in the stall, Dennis Quaid's character storms in on the phone, having a conversation talking very bluntly about Sparkle's age and needing a young talent to replace her, unaware she is able to overhear the conversation. After she exits the stall mournfully and stares at herself in the mirror with a look of sadness and contempt, we immediately cut to the infamous shrimp scene. So let's recap. In the span of less than 9 minutes, we have a fairly clear picture of the film's premise at its most fundamentally basic with the egg. We get to see an entire lifetime's worth of a career without ever seeing the face of the person we're witnessing via the Walk of Fame. We then see the detailed nature of that career from the film set and the hallway. We see foreshadowing of gender issues from which restroom is closed and which is open. And then from the bathroom scene, we observe the core conflict that the film will be having this character face. But again, there's so much more that we witness. Similar to the Goonies, through accents and familiar imagery, i.e. the Walk of Fame, we have established that this takes place in present time, in America, and in a form of reality as we know it, unlike, say, Lord of the Rings or Dune. But wait, there are elements that are at odds with this notion of our reality. The crazy orange of the hallway with the obscenely loud carpet, the Overlook-esque bathroom design, the uncomfortably close fisheye lens view of Dennis Quaid as he's on the phone and urinating. This feels like reality, but a strained version of it, like a fever dream turned nightmare, often referred to as hyper-reality. Everything about this first 9 minutes is telling the audience, this is a familiar world with familiar themes of conflict, but it's our bubble of a world with which we can examine these conflicts in a hyper-realistic environment of fiction. This is hardly new territory. Sci-fi, fantasy, and horror have frequently tackled modern relatable conflicts such as sexism, racism, and more by stripping away superfluous elements of what we consider to be reality and providing a different perspective with which to view these issues in a more distilled way. The substance just takes that leap away from reality by inches instead of miles. Which now brings me to my point of intention and presumption and the reason I felt compelled to make this video in the first place. In the video I made on the substance, where I talked about whether or not it would be possible to take the substance safely, I received a lot of comments that seemed to be hung up on the small details of plotline intricacies. Now, I love a good thought experiment as much as the next person, possibly more even, but many of the comments seem to be hung up on these to the point where it affected their viewing of the movie. While finding a myriad of plot holes in regards to the 7-day rotational structure of the substance with flight layovers and such, the problematic quantity of the drug provided in its kits, who made the kits, how they exchanged money for the kits, etc., the overall message of the movie seemed to get lost in the examination of the minutiae. It's not for me to say whether these individuals would have enjoyed the movie more or less if this had been thoughts that they allowed to just wash over them, but at the very least, it seemed to me like they were unwilling or unable to meet the film where it stood. Did I have these thoughts while watching the film? Absolutely 100%. It's fun to think about. But again, the hyper-realism clearly portrayed in the aesthetics of the set design, camera work, and editing told me that examination of the science and details would be missing the forest for the trees, at least in this movie. Again, this video is not you're watching movies wrong, it's we're watching movies wrong. This is because I'm absolutely guilty of doing this as well. And when I think of films that I disliked but eventually watched again and had a completely different experience the second time around, I realized on reflection that every single one of those times was because I was rigid in my expectations of intentions and presumption of what the movie should be on my first watch. In fact, one of the most egregious examples of when I did this was with Coralie Farge's previous feature film, Revenge. On my first watch, I did not allow myself to meet the film where it stood, and I misinterpreted its intentions, which negatively affected my viewing of it. Like The Substance, but to a lesser degree, Revenge takes place in a form of reality, but not the gritty, bare-knuckle world that we walk in day to day out there. So, as the character of Jen is brutally assaulted, my brain is unable to reconcile the unrealistic details of physics, biology, and how much blood the human body holds within. So I made my review of it and then spent the next several years watching friends of mine with similar interests and tastes fawn over the film. And I remained baffled. So eventually I watched it again and purposefully corrected my mistake. Instead of being rigid with what I felt the film should be, I allowed it to present to me without bias. And I realized early on that it was right in the title, and I somehow missed it. Viewing it as a revenge movie, a love letter to revenge films of the past, and a dissection of misogyny, consent, and entitlement, I ultimately found myself watching a very different movie entirely, and I loved it. As Jen cauterizes her wound with a beer can by a campfire, I let go of the thoughts of aluminum being a shitty conductor and how the eagle emblem of the beer can should be reversed in her burned scar. I still saw it, but it didn't matter. This wasn't the reality waiting for me outside my front door. This was a revenge flick with a great message and a badass, tragic heroine. It is critically important that when we sit down to watch a movie, we do our best to ignore everything until the film starts rolling. The director's previous works, the lead actor's preferred archetypes, the content of the poster, especially the content of the trailer, all of it. And just allow ourselves to Set presumption aside and meet the movie where it stands, rather than attempt to shoehorn it to meet our expectations. Of course, that's not the only way we're watching movies wrong, but it feels like commenting on attention span is a bit of low-hanging fruit. It's not that I don't want to mention it, I do and I will, but I don't think it's the most egregious error, and so I didn't want to discuss it first or foremost. Watching a film, or a movie, or a flick should be something that deserves our full attention. Putting the phone down and allowing ourselves to focus is not just important for understanding the plot details as it unfolds, but even sometimes more importantly, to allow ourselves the opportunity to experience immersion. It's difficult to feel a resonance with a film without allowing ourselves to be fully immersed in its story and its characters. And I would argue that the most significant metric of success for a film, or any piece of art really, is to provoke a feeling in the audience. Any feeling. Love, laughter, sadness, kinship, anger, anything. If an artist is capable of moving the viewer into feeling something, then they have achieved something truly great. But we must allow ourselves that opportunity to be good faith recipients. Some of the most fun and memorable movie watching experiences I can recall come from being blindsided by a film that, by all accounts, I was enjoying but not expecting to be moved by. If I was only half paying attention and checking my phone every few minutes, those moments would have been lost on me. And I would have known on a factual level those scenes in the movies existed, but I would have deprived myself the opportunity to be immersed and to be moved by them. Now, rumor has it that some streaming services that create original content have requested from their screenwriters the incorporation of elements to take into account people not paying attention. That if something is going to be a visually important element of the plotline, that dialogue detailing that visual concept be shoehorned in to allow folks that have it on in the background to be able to follow along. Again, this may be my old man yelling at clouds moment, but I can't help but feel like this is the absolute wrong direction to be heading. I think at the very least, if we're going to watch a movie and want the privilege of giving it thoughtful examination and discussion, it should be viewed with full attention. You don't need to dim the lights and set the scene every time you press play, but at least put the phone down. And if you really need to check it, pause the damn movie. Sometimes with movies I really want to absorb, I'll sit in a virtual theater with my VR headset. Through perspective manipulation, it's a simulated big screen theater experience where I'm sitting in a stadium seating IMAX-sized venue with nothing from the outside world interrupting my viewing. Granted, this is the extreme end of things, but you get the gist. Lastly, I'd just briefly like to talk about recognizing the movie watching environment. Not so much the physical space or what size your TV is, but more the mood and the people we share our watching experiences with. After over 500 movie reviews, it's rare that I ever landed on a movie just being outright bad. Even if it didn't work for me, I oftentimes made it a point to think hard and try to find an audience and an environment that would see it in a more favorable light. If you're alone, sober, and wanting a movie with some depth, 2002's Demon Island would be a pretty painful experience, though why you'd pick that in that moment is beyond me. But the same movie, shown on a Friday night with a group of friends and some pizzas and sleeping bags, absolute gold. I estimate that with rare exception, every movie has its time, its place, and its environment, and adjusting your perspective and preparation for a particular film can be immensely beneficial. Once again, I'm not going to make the claim that if people watched a movie in a more receptive frame of mind, attention span, or physical environment, it automatically means they'll like it. Some films just aren't to our liking no matter how we approach it, and that's all right. But if we can appreciate the magic that movies can bring to our lives and do just a little bit more to meet them where they stand, instead of expecting them to conform to our bad habits and prejudices, we at least give that film and ourselves a fighting chance to experience that magic. Things are tough out there, and they're getting tougher. Allowing the opportunity to have 120 minutes of escapist magic in our lives, it's worth the effort. So thank you so much for joining me here at Rotted Entertainment. I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Take care, everybody. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.